Good evening, everybody. I'm Jennifer Ray. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development for the Town of Arlington. Welcome to everybody for attending this evening. I'm guessing we'll see more people coming in as we go through the evening. This evening is a combination of an educational forum and an opportunity for people to ask some questions of the panelists who are here tonight, and also the staff and board members and committee members from a variety of groups about housing issues in Arlington. First, though, we're going to start with Dan Dunn, who is the chair of the Select Board, who's going to welcome everybody here this evening. Thank you.
Can people hear me well enough like this?
Yes.
Excellent. I'll do better off. Well, hello everyone, thank you all for coming. I also want to thank our panelists. And when Jenny and Aaron and I were talking earlier this week about my remarks and who's coming, and they told me who was on the panel, and I said, not only do you guys not have a panel, you have a woke panel. So, that was like, good work. I was very impressed with that. I was very impressed with that. So as Jenny said, this is meant to be an educational session. Town meeting has endorsed some really ambitious housing goals, and we need to educate ourselves in order to achieve those goals. We need to understand more about the challenges we have and what the causes of those challenges are. We also need to understand our tools better. What are the capabilities of our tools? What are the good sides of the tool and what are the bad sides of the tools? These educational sessions are going to help us make those decisions and the compromises that we need. And when I talk about the goals that we have, I'm talking about the ones that were approved, endorsed by town meeting in the housing production plan and the master plan. So I want to talk first about some of the challenges. And this isn't exactly housing related, but I would be irresponsible if I didn't mention it. When people say, Dan, what's the biggest problem in town? I say that our expenses grow faster than our revenue. And then that's why we create a 5-year plan or a 3-year plan, and that's why we have coming up in probably in sometime not even next year, we'll have an override question on the ballot. And that's the strategy that we have to manage what I would describe as our biggest problem. But I think when we talk, tonight's more appropriate to talk about what our second biggest problem in town is. 5 years ago, I would have said health insurance, or maybe even special education costs. But my answer has changed over the last year. And I don't even say school enrollment, and I don't say the new high school project. I say it's housing prices. We all know someone who's trying to move into town, but is bidding over asking price and not getting a call back. We know people are moving out of town because of affordability issues. We know people who work in town government, in schools, and public safety who can't afford to work in the town that they live in. The Arlington Housing Corporation, the Arlington Housing Authority, and other service groups get perhaps the clearest view of the problem. They see families and individuals who are struggling and often failing to find adequate affordable housing. In my role as selectman, I'm often asked to help fund their efforts through the community development block grants or through professional support from town departments. We also see attempts to manage the problem through 40B projects. Some of them are productive and helpful. Others, such as the Newgar proposal, would destroy wetlands and cause more flooding problems than they do create affordable housing. 40B is a blunt instrument, and I wish we had greater control over its implementation. On the other hand, there are tools we do have control over. One of them, as I mentioned, is money. We don't have the money to actually solve the problem. We have other tools like zoning. The zoning changes, we encourage some development in ways and directions that help fit us and help resolve our problems. I think a key point here is to think about change. We can't solve this problem by doing nothing. We're going to have to make changes. We need our neighborhoods to think about that and find the changes that are good for them. One of the words I used earlier was compromise. We're going to have to look at our zoning, our neighborhoods, and make compromises that are good for us all. That's what this educational series is aimed at. We want the town to understand the challenges, understand the tools, and armed with that information, find the compromise that get us to our goals. Thank you all for being here. Let's learn together.
Great. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. I did it. All right. So tonight I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we're doing here, why we're here this evening, and what we hope to get out of it. I think Dan has already covered a great deal of that actually for us. But I want market have a very direct impact on what's happening locally. Arlington is not alone in trying to address this issue, nor is it alone in trying to solve the issue. We're also going to hear about the specific types of strategies that other communities throughout Metro Boston primarily are using. But we'll also hear about insights from particularly Chris and Dana, who works statewide on this issue, and Susan, who have an insight in terms of all different types of municipalities and what they're struggling with and how they're working on ways to, as Dana said, work on compromises and strategies that work in their local communities to address this very important issue. We'll have time towards the end, basically about a half hour, I'm guessing, for questions and answers. And then we're going to wrap up to be able to give to you a sense of what the next steps are as follow-up and action items for this forum. One thing I want to do first, though, is actually introduce you to the Housing Plan Implementation Committee. If you are on the committee, would you please stand up? And I just want to recognize everybody who's here. So thank you so much for this is a group that's been working on implementing the housing plan, which was adopted, as Dan said, in 2016. It was adopted by both the redevelopment board and also the select board, and then approved by the Department of Housing and Community Development. It is a 5-year plan that helps Arlington to address these issues that we're going to be talking about this evening. And it's we need the committee to help us move this forward because it is a lot of different things that we're trying to address, both zoning, issues around the regulatory process, the permitting process, issues about creating housing for all different types of people who live in the community and want to live in this community. We're also looking at the programs that are available, the resources that could be used to support these various actions, and then the capacity to execute and make things happen. So the committee has been a very valuable resource for us to be able to bounce ideas off of, and then also to work on some current efforts, which include things like zoning initiatives to address multifamily housing by right in some locations in this community, and also looking at accessory dwelling units, which is an issue that the community has looked at in the past. We'd like to look at it again. We'd also like to look at our inclusionary zoning policies and understand whether or not there's some opportunities to make changes so we can again produce the housing that's needed for the people who are most in need in the community. The other thing that we're working on is with a collection of other municipalities in Metro Boston. It's called the Metropolitan Mayor's Coalition. There's a group that's working on housing issues together through the Housing Task Force. And that group has identified both production-related goals and then also will be devising policy-related goals and strategies that we would both work on individually as a municipality and then together collectively to take action on this issue. So quickly, I just want to note that there's a number of handouts in the back of the room, which includes a glossary of terms. Housing has a lot of different terminology that you might hear different speakers use this evening. So if you are interested, you can see the glossary of issues, which was developed by my staff and others. We also have a sheet that's full of great infographics that comes directly from the Housing Production Plan that can give you some quick insights into some of the housing needs in this community. And then I think lastly, we have a form that both is a speaker form and then another form in the back that will allow you to provide us with comments. If you didn't feel like whatever you wanted to say was heard this evening, or you have more to say simply, please feel free to fill out that comment form and give it back to the staff. And then lastly, I really want to thank my staff, Julie Wayman, who's the Community Development Block Grant Coordinator for the town, and Erin Burko, who is the Assistant Director of the department. Thanks to both of you for all of your work with this opportunity. All right, so without further ado, I believe I am turning it over to Chris Hutchman, who is the Director of the Massachusetts Housing Choice Program for the state. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jenny and Erin. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, I do have a cold. Fade off. Let me know by letting me know. Okay, so I'd like to start by talking about people, because when we talk about housing, we're not just talking about a theoretical, we're going to build housing just to have housing units sit there. We build housing for people. And the question that I ask all around the state and when I'm working with a community or a region do we have the housing stock necessary to accommodate the changing needs of our populations? And so I'm going to be going over some demographic information and some statistics about housing and housing supply for the state and the region. And so I like to just remind people, these are our actual people. In here includes a picture of my 94-year-old mother. That's one of our changing demographics, is that we are living longer. I was really blessed. She lived with me for the last 10 years of her life, and that was wonderful. But that was, I was able to do that, and that was a unique situation. On the bottom left is my son with his, he's a lot older now, but that's his elementary school teacher. He loved her, he's so happy. I live in a town adjacent to Arlington that also has very high housing costs, and I'm sure that she worked in Lexington and she could not afford to rent or to buy. So this is the place where I like to start, is who are we talking about when we look at housing? So hold on to your seats. This is an animated slide that's showing population information. And this is basically illustrating the baby boomers as the baby boom goes through time. So as you watch, the years are ticking by. We're in the 90s now. The baby boom is starting to have their children. Those are called the millennials. You'll start to see another bump of millennials to the left. The baby boom is getting older and older as we go all the way to 2016. It's going to go through it one more time, so we get a little bit of a chance to look at this. And let me point out a couple things. I put these bars here. The bar shows back in 1970, which was the start of this, the number of people that were in the age group of 50 to 54. Just look when you see it at 2016, how many more people we have just in that age bracket. So, and this is shouldn't be news to folks, but we are all getting older, and there's a lot of people who are getting older altogether. And then the other thing I like to point out is on the second bar on the very right, that shows the level of people over age 85 in 1970. And this is the illustration of my mom. We are living a lot longer, and so our needs are really going to change. Your needs change. Like, I'm still recovering from tendonitis, from shoveling the snow. Remember the snow? I got a lot of snow. And I still do have a high schooler, but I'm kind of looking forward to the chance when I'm not shoveling snow, and I'm going to be looking for different housing units. Baby boomers, we're all looking for different housing units. People who are extremely elderly need different housing units also. They do different. What I'm going to, if I downsize into a townhouse, if I live to be 94, I'm going to need something different. I may need care, I may need an elevator, and all sorts of universal design. So that's just an overview of the population demographics. This is taking a look at the workforce. And so again, one of the things that we see here is that it's very similar. You see that kind of bump. You see the baby boomers, which is in this kind of 45 to 65 age group. One of the things that is important about this slide is that it shows is that our workforce is aging, and again, just like I hope to downsize into an apartment or a townhouse where I'm not shoveling so much snow, I do hope to retire someday. One of the things that this slide shows us is that there are not workers that are going to replace all the baby boomers who are going to retire. So if our economy keeps going strongly, people will move into or continue to move into our state to take the jobs that will be left over from the baby boomers who are retiring. So it's not just the population that we have here or our kids and the millennials that are coming, it's new workers who will come in because there will be jobs that are available. I want to take just a minute to note I have some logos on these slides. Mass Housing Partnership, so Carly works at Mass Housing Partnership. These I would love to take credit for that really lovely, like wavy slide about demographics that makes it so understandable. Mass Housing Partnership has the Center for Housing Data, and I have great colleagues that produce these for me and for Susan as well. And so I just want to give them a shout out, because being able to talk about this data is really important. So again, very similar to talking about the workforce that is going to be retiring. One of the things, and this is from the MAPC, your regional planning agency, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and they have projected into the future what's going to happen to the baby boomers. So again, the columns on the left are going to show baby boomers who will retire. So it shows the current level of baby boomers, and then in the red in 2030, all of the people who will be no longer, the baby boomers will be no longer in the workforce. So again, there's going to be a steep drop off. But on the right, this is a projection by demographers, and it shows that those baby boomers are not necessarily as likely to move out of their homes. So that again produces an additional burden on the housing stock, which is that people may stay in their homes a little bit longer. It may be that when you look to downsize, you can't find the right kind of house. I might want to stay in the town where I've been for the last 15 years, but if they don't have the apartments or townhouses, they don't have the kind of housing stock, I may end up just kind of hunkering down into my big house, and I guess I'll probably have to hire somebody to show my house. But so that is, again, a projections about what's going to happen with housing. So the real story about housing in Massachusetts has to do with the supply. It's really, we have a supply and demand problem. This is statewide data, and it's looking at the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where we used to build 30,000 housing units a year. These are showing single family and multifamily in the darker, but it was pretty consistent in those decades. In the last 3 decades, and we're still in the 2010s, and so and it has been going very strongly in the last couple of years in terms of productions, but we're at about half of the rate. And it's a pretty simple supply and demand issue. We are producing a lot less housing, and housing prices have responded. The vacancy rates that are shown on this slide, this is for the state as a whole, but if you want to focus in on Middlesex County, the rental vacancy rate is under 2%, and the homeownership for sale vacancy rate less than 0.5%. Again, your selectman chair, you probably know people who are having trouble looking for houses unless there is almost no supply. And again, if you're realtors or you know realtors, you'll hear them say this too, there's just no inventory out there. To give you a sense of a healthy rental market, really you want to look at 5 or 6% vacancy for a healthy rental market. That allows you to look at vacant units, allows you to exit your unit and have enough time and space to do that. So the entire state, with really only the vacation counties, which have higher rentals to begin with, even they are not close to the 5 to 6%. And so there's a really very clear link to what's happening in housing prices. Here on this chart, Massachusetts is the dark blue line. Unfortunately, it is the top line. This is home sale prices indexed back to 1980, and we are the fastest growing home sale prices in the country. We are outpacing California and New York. The country as a whole is the dark black line on the bottom. And if you look back in the 1980s, remember the bars about the production was 60s, 70s, and 80s. We were kind of in the mix. We were producing about 30,000, and we were right about the same as the rest of the country. Since then, that production has led to this increased housing prices. The same thing has happened. These are rental prices, and this is the light bars here are comparing 2006, so just a little over 10 years ago, to 2016, and in the dark bars. And so I know you can't see this from where you're sitting, and I think the staff will have this these presentations on the PDF on the website, so if you really want to dig into this, you can look at it. But as you can see, there's just more and more at the higher end where there didn't used to be, and there is not the same level of increase in that middle or more affordable band, which is in the middle there. And I guess, and these are state numbers, and these are the most sobering. This talks about the struggle with affordability. When we talk about housing, we generally talk about housing that becomes unaffordable when you're paying more than 30% of your household income on your housing. On the left is renters, and on the right is, on the left is for sale, on the right is renters, and they are organized by income categories. The yellow band here is showing who are paying more than 30%. The dark brown is showing people who are paying more than 50% of their household income. So obviously the lower income ranges are burdened, but even the middle and the upper income ranges are also still burdened and still paying more than 30% in some cases. And these numbers are just outstanding, really outstanding in a bad way. They are astounding. The numbers of people across the Commonwealth that are burdened both in, homeowners and renters. And so this is really the problem that we have to face. So this is the answer to my question. I don't think that we have a housing stock right now. And so what I do, and I'll talk later about my program and some of the strategies that the Fico administration has to help try and help communities solve these problems. But I think for now, I'm going to pass it on to Pam, who's going to talk to you a little bit about local housing in Arlington.
A glass of water there, but that's not going to stay. Good evening, it's nice to see you all. I'm going to first talk about who we are as Housing Corporation of Arlington, for those of you who don't know us. We are a not-for-profit corporation run by a board of directors, 12 members right now, and actually there are a couple of them in the audience if you'd like to just wave and say hello. There we go. We have a very small staff and 2.5 staff people, which is unfortunately pretty common these days. So our overhead, our administrative costs are extraordinarily low. We do affordable housing. We have 93 units under management right now in the town of Arlington. All of our portfolio, our entire portfolio is in the town of Arlington. And we have another 57 units that are in our pipeline, 9 units we just broke ground on last week, yes, and 20 Westminster. So we hope to bring those in by the end of this year and be renting out December, January, late fall, somewhere around there. We also run the homelessness prevention program, which helps people remain permanently housed. We give out small grants that we raise actually from households in Arlington each year. Arlington is very generous now, and we send out one appeal and they give us money, which we then turn around and hand out to tenants, households that need cash in order to pay back rent or security deposit or moving expenses, something like that, so that they can stay permanently housed. It's a remarkable program that we, out of 18% of the entire 900 households that we've helped, we did a survey, is what I'm trying to say, and 18% responded to our survey. And out of that 18%, 95% were still permanently housed 6 to 10 years after we had helped them. So it's a remarkably stable and functional program that we have. All right, so our portfolio is mixed up. It's all over town. It runs from the Heights all the way down to East Arlington, and we have a variety of buildings that are 2 families, 4, 6, 12, 14 units. Our biggest development is Capitol Square, 32 units. And these are just some of our buildings. So what I did was I went and looked quickly at a few of the larger affordable housing entities in town. So Arlington Housing Authority, right now, their portfolio is 510 units of elderly housing, again, in various parts of the town, and 210 family units. So they have a total portfolio of 720. However, the wait list is 1,428 people. Out of that wait list, 473 are elderly. And if you can look back, oops, wrong way, nope. They only have 510, so it's going to take them some time to get housed all of those units. And the families, they have 955 families on their wait list. They only have 210 family units. So significant issues with looking for affordable housing in town and being able to find it. Mildred Square Apartments, they have 146. They're on Mill Street. If they're nice-looking brick buildings, 4 stories. When I asked them how many people they had on the wait list, they said, "Oh, we have no idea." What we do know is it takes from the time you fill out an application until the time you get into a unit, it's at least 3 years. That's a pretty significant amount of time. So ours are, as I said, a variety of different types of buildings. Our Capitol Square, which is 32 units, we have 162 households on the wait list. 25 of the units are, they're looking for studios, 103 of the households are looking for 1 bedrooms, and 34 of the waitlist are looking for 2 bedrooms. Most of our units down there are 1 bedrooms, but as you can see, it's a huge number for the small number of units we have. Our scattered site waitlist, which has 61 units in it, this is our waitlist. 181 are looking for 1 bedrooms, 216 are looking for 2 bedrooms, 125 households are looking for 3 bedrooms, and 25 are looking for 4 bedrooms. Just to compare, we have approximately 4 4-bedroom units in our entire portfolio. So unfortunately, they're probably going to wait a long time. So our entire wait list is 714 people for our currently 93 units. Significant issue with shortages of housing. Our wait list basically is made up of 33% of Arlington residents. The remaining are from out of town. 138 of them, of the 714 households, do have some kind of Section 8 subsidies. Could be mobile vouchers, or it could be some other kind of rental subsidies. And there are 1,130 children looking for housing. This is our wait list. We have culled our wait list pretty dramatically in the last few years by mailing out notices to say, hey, are you still interested? Many of them come back not able to be mailed, not able to be delivered because the people have moved. They were looking for housing at some point. They found something, they moved, and did not keep themselves up on the wait list. So if you see, I don't know if you can see the time frame, but, and I think you can hear me. Can you still hear me? Yeah, I have a pretty loud voice. So if you start, okay, so this is 2010. If you look from 26 to 2011, the tall blue lines are actually those who make less than $20,000. The next columns are those who make below, I think it's $40,000, and then the smaller ones are those who make over $60,000 a year. So as you see in the past years, we've had a significantly higher number of people that are making lower amounts of money. As we get closer, we only go up to 2016, but as you see, the numbers of the lower have shrunk pretty dramatically. The lower income levels have shrunk pretty dramatically. And the in 2016, the $20,000 to $40,000 has really almost caught up, basically, with those under 20. And then we still have a few over $60,000 per income. That means that affordability is a serious problem. And you know, we have really low rents. But as our expenses continue to go up, as Dan mentioned, expenses go up, revenue doesn't seem to keep pace. We are having to raise our rents. And we are finding that even people who are still on our wait list are coming in and saying, oh wow, I can't afford that kind of rent. It's a pretty serious issue. We have people calling us every day for the homelessness prevention program, saying they need help paying rent and they are in danger of becoming homeless. It's a very stark reality check on what is happening in Arlington and across the nation, unfortunately. This actually shows you the same thing that I was mentioning before. Income under $20,000 is still 55%. The income between 20 and 40 is now up to 34%, and the remaining from 40 to 60% income dollar amount. Sorry. This actually is from the Low Income Housing Coalition out of DC. And they put out an annual sort of State of the Union, and this was from 2017. This shows Massachusetts actually is, if you see Massachusetts there, they're saying that the renter wage in 2017 was actually at least $7.68 too low for people to really be able to afford rent in most of the communities. I'm going to change to this one. This actually just came out yesterday. This is their 2018 report that is updated. It actually now shows specifically zip codes that you can zoom in on. And these are the 2 zip codes from Arlington. So it's 74 and 76. It actually says that for a family to be able to only work 40 hours a week, they have to make between $34 an hour and $36 an hour to even be able to afford a 2-bedroom market rent here. That means their income has to be between $69,000 and $75,000 a year. Now, you know, in the good old days, that was a lot of money. These days, that's a pretty serious problem. So we don't know where we're going. We have a pipeline, we're trying to meet it, but as anyone who's in the housing field knows, it takes years to put together the money to create new housing. Our 2014, our 20 Westminster building, we purchased in 2014, and it's only going to be 9 units, but it took us 8 years basically to put together the $4 million that we need to go ahead and purchase it and rehab it and get it set up. We have in the pipeline our 19R Park Ave and our 117 Broadway, which is 2 different sites with 3 buildings. It'll be 48 units if and when we get funding. We have our large application into the state. We're hoping they will award us the money, but it's costing us $19 million. We have $4 million committed, mostly from the town and the North Suburban Consortium. And to that, we are eternally grateful. It has given us a significant advantage when the state is looking at which deals to fund. So thank you. And we are hoping in August we hear that they have decided to fund this project so that we can break ground in probably 2019. Probably rent up in 2020. So I am going to end with that, and I'll be available for questions.
I think I want to take issue with the title of my section. I'm not quite sure. I like that. So just a quick ad, because we're, when you work for state government, you're obligated so that you understand that, good things do happen with government. We're one of the quasi-public agencies. We're actually a public bank. And we finance affordable rental housing. We provide permanent financing. We provide the state's best first-time homebuyer program, the One Mortgage program that supports more first-time homebuyers under 60% AMI and more first-time homebuyers of color than any other mortgage program in the state. And we do community assistance. That's my team. And we work with communities across the state, kind of meeting communities where they are. Because people's housing needs and their solutions are different. And as you probably feel sometimes, or especially if you work in this business, you feel like it's a one-size-fits-all in terms of the way that government can respond to things. And I think that's probably true in some ways for a lot of reasons. Maybe that's how people feel about 40B, and I'm going to talk about 40B in a minute. But what we realized is that it's really hard to have conversations at the local level without good information. The Metropolitan Area Planning Council, the regional planning agency that includes Arlington, provides some great data. And we were using and working very closely with MSA, with Jenny when she was there, around the data that supports better conversations and more informed conversations. But we realized that some of the data that we needed wasn't there. And so we created the Center for Housing Data that Chris talked about, that you will see the governor references in some of his housing policies, other state agencies, quasi-public like Mass Housing, other agencies use to help inform policy. I want to always I feel like you should always put an asterisk on data, right? We know what we know. We don't always get it right, and it should be used to inform a conversation to help people think differently. Because what happens is all of our decisions are somehow influenced because they're in this context of what's happening at the national level with housing, at the state level, at the regional level, at your town level, and even in your neighborhood, right? So you get these kind of different dynamics that are affecting outcomes, and these are political, fiscal, economic, what am I missing up there? Demographic, which Chris talked a lot about. We have some of the same slides. I'm going to just breeze through those. But, you know, I think what happens in communities, especially for those of us who have lived here our whole lives, which I have, actually one of my first jobs in this field was in affordable housing management at Millbrook in the late 80s. So, you know, I mean, this has been my whole life. And we tend to start thinking, well, it's always been this way, right? This is the way it's always been. And so we don't change the way we do things. We don't change the way we think about housing production and zoning because we're not conscious, nor why would we be? We're all busy, we have lives, you know, not everyone wants to see day to week. And, you know, but meanwhile, there's a lot of things that are changing. The demographics that Chris talked about, changing preferences. You know, she was talking about people downsizing. Those are the same types of units, what we call big units. This is the same home. See, this is what happens when you're in the business. But those are the same homes that people entering the market want too, right? They want kind of smaller, more livable, walkable communities. So when people talk about age-restricted housing, unless there's real deep services, it kind of makes me twitch. Because we want to deal with folks who are aging, but we also want to support people coming into the market. One of the biggest things that has changed is restrictive zoning practices. That chart that I have as well, that Chris showed, where it showed that the median home price in the state of Massachusetts is at the same as the country as a whole in the early 1980s. It is no mistake. It is not a random act that we have gone so off the rails. It's in total reaction to what has happened locally. The 40B thing, and as Dan said, is a blunt instrument. I get that. I mean, I really do a lot of technical assistance with communities around 40B, but I just want to give you some context to keep in mind. 40B came online 50 years ago, right when the Fair Housing Act came online, and soon after Dr. King was assassinated. It was part of an effort to push back the discriminatory housing practices that were happening and continue to happen in this state. And so, and it became and has become the only way that we actually produce multifamily housing. Because areas that had multifamily housing zoning as of right, downzone those areas. We go into communities now, and I should give you a little information too about the project eligibility letter process. Before a developer can come into your community and put in a 40B application, they have to get a project eligibility letter from a issuing agency. MHP is one of those agencies. And we do a ton of due diligence on the community. And what we look for is, does the community have zoning that allows multifamily housing as of right? And if the community has made an effort, like Reading, to create areas where they want to see housing growth and production that makes sense, then the Pell issuing agency, in this case Mass Housing, can refuse the Pell. And so the developer never even gets to the zoning board. But what's happened in 50 years is most communities have not planned, have not had inclusionary zoning that includes affordability. And so then, you know, people are like, oh, bad developers. Yeah, that's true. But in some ways, I have to say, I think our communities have not responded to needs either. So we have a lot of things happening. The other thing we don't have in this state, despite our, you know, that we're so progressive and all that and bag of chips, we do not have an office of state planning. This like blows my mind constantly. Even though I've been here my whole life, I have lived in other places and worked in other places. But we make as a state, and this is not about this administration. This goes back. You know, we had kind of a weak off of estate planning in the early 80s. But we make economic growth decisions. We make all sorts of infrastructure decisions in silos without any kind of look at what's the infrastructure to support that growth. Yesterday in the Boston Globe there was an article about how residents in Braintree are freaking out about the Amazon distribution center that wants to go in there, right? So the mayor's like, jobs, economic growth, great. And the community's like, traffic. And anybody here, like, you get daily red line rider like myself, oh my gosh, don't you just sometimes be like, can you serve cocktails on this thing? because it'll ruin your day. It can totally, I get on Davis Square, between Davis and South Station, I can get off, I can be shaking like in tears. So we're this kind of entire infrastructure, because we've bought into this concept that taxes are bad and government's bad, and so we've pulled back on everything over the past 40 years. And so what happens is, when I first moved to this area, I got a 2-bedroom with my girlfriend Stacy, and we right outside Davis Square, like diagonally across from Redbones, and we paid $600 a month, right? And that's what we call, that's a great deal. That was naturally affordable housing. And then we have the capital layer. This is the stuff that Pam's talking about. This is what she needs. She needs deeply subsidized housing to provide support for people. As she showed you those income bars, right? That her list is changing. It's because that little a has totally disappeared, right? Because we don't have enough, and because the demographics have changed. All the stuff that Chris talked about, right? And so as things are not the same. And so we also have changes in what is happening to, this is not just here in Massachusetts, this is everywhere, where the job growth is. This was a page on the business section of the Globe, and I am the only one who reads the paper, like in a paper. Okay, I know, I have to say one of the reasons I like it is I end up reading things I wouldn't read otherwise. But anyway, so this was in the business section on the same day. So this is a juice shop on the left in Acton, where the woman has been wanting to expand her business because she's so successful, but can't hire somebody at $15 an hour, and and for 2 years has been trying to find people. And then on the right, Accenture is going to add 400 jobs. So we have $15 an hour and 100,000 plus. But there's no sense of where, we're not like thinking about, okay, how does this fit in? How does the housing fit in? How does transportation support all of this? This is right now, Jenny has known me a long time, and I've been in this business a long time, and I have a couple of pet peeves. This is one of my biggest ones. So when we think about economic growth, this casino will open in less than a year. We can all, from where we live, ride our bikes there, right? It's close enough. We're not going to, but we could. 4,000 permanent jobs. Doesn't that sound awesome? That sounds great. Yet, the majority of those are going to be earning $25,000 a year. The vast majority. Where are those folks going to live? Where are they? We don't have those people right now living in the state. I'm telling you that right now. This is not going to, if you look on any idea list or any of those listings, I encourage you to look up the casino. They're giving people who live in the area preference and bonuses because they want people who already live here so they understand how hard it's going to be to get people. So this is what happens. So we have job growth in the extreme left, which is the lower income jobs. Then you have job growth, this higher income bracket, and I would argue that the folks way over to the right that are making, over 200% of AMI can live anywhere they want. And this is what causes this kind of gentrification and this push. And so the folks in in that group, they have certain preferences. They want to live closer to facilities, restaurants, to bars. There is a real shift in demographics. And the underlying economics and where our job growth as a country is going is only going to further exacerbate that. So, you know, as a state, we have this investment in regional transit. You know, it's not working for me right now, but whatever. It's working for folks in Somerville, New Canaan used to live, where they got their extension. But what we find is that even though this is a regional problem, it's not a regional solution. And so you have communities with access to transit that are not planning and not adding multifamily units at all. And so the majority, 64% of all multifamily units happen in 5 communities: Boston, Cambridge, Quincy, Chelsea, and Canton. In Canton because they had a couple of big developments. That's not going to work for what's happening in the economy. You know what, I just have to, can anyone think of what happened in the early 80s that might have helped exacerbate all of this? Well, maybe, but I was thinking something more local, like you. No, Prop 2.5. Right? I mean, Dan just talked about an override. This is, you know, there's been some, I think, and I haven't, you know, this is my, I would say, well-informed assumption. I would love if anybody could do regression analysis and kind of figure out if I'm right, but I really think that we have made certain decisions that have then created this really big problem. So we spend a lot of time looking how we compare to other parts of the country that have similar industries. So we're looking at kind of economic opportunities in similar places. And what we find is a direct correlation between the building permits per capita and the net migration between metros. So we are, blue bar over to the right, and that Metro Boston area includes, I think, 160 communities. So obviously Arlington's in there. And we're losing people constantly to other parts of the state. So going back to what Chris talked about the kind of realities of demographics, it's like a really bad game for musical chairs. So there's not enough chairs to house people, but we're going to have too many chairs on the job side. So what does this look like here? So when we go into communities and do our technical assistance, we look at what life was here in the 80s, because that's when I was in that age bracket, and voting. And so this is in today's dollars. So today's dollars, an 18 to 34-year-old is making, in this area, is making just about $22,000. Today, that's $47,000. This is really different. I have to tell you, we did this for Hanover a couple of months ago, and it was $33,000 in the 80s and $34,000 now. So it really is different depending on where you are. So in today's dollars, the median house price here in Arlington would have been just over $200,000, and today it's $700,000. So when people say, I love it, when we did this in Hanover, someone said, well, those millennials, they drink that fancy coffee and drinking those craft beers, and I'm like, yeah, that's not enough. Drinking past blue ribbon is not going to make up the difference on that. And then the other big difference that we have is the amount of debt that folks are carrying, which makes a real dent on people's capacity to purchase a home. So what are others doing? Well, I think what's happening across the state is that folks are really seeing the production of homes is part of the infrastructure. So as we talk about infrastructure like water and sewer and transportation and public education, we have to talk about housing too. And how we produce housing that answers the different and changing needs of our population. Not the kind of housing that we've always done and that feels safe and to us because that's what we're used to. But housing that responds to the world that's changing around us. The South Shore Chamber is taking this on. It's the only chamber that's actually writing 40B letters of support for 40B, for particular 40Bs in their communities. And I think, back to Dan's point about the 40Bs, what can you do locally? We have, and I'm happy to come back and, talk about, what Needham's doing and what Melrose is doing and what Natick's doing and East Hampton and, Harvardstown and communities, across the state that are thinking differently, that are zoning for a different type of production and growth, that are saying that there are certain parts of our community that can get taller, that can be denser, but we're going to do it thoughtfully. We're going to do it in a way that reflects our community, but doesn't replicate it. So I think that's my thing. Thank you.
Thank you for having me tonight. I'm Dana Winter. I'm the Director of Municipal Engagement for Citizens Housing and Association. We are a statewide affordable housing advocacy group. We do advocacy statewide, legislation and funding for affordable housing, and we also do a lot of work around first-time home buyers, education, and also around access to housing, making sure that people can find housing that fits their needs. The Municipal Engagement Initiative that I'm running is basically doing what we think you want to do here in Arlington, to build support for affordable housing production in communities across the Commonwealth, and working with the community where they are. I love what you said, where we meet communities where they are, what they want to do, what you see as needs, using all of the data that's at your disposal to decide where you want to go. And we think that every community could benefit from public education around affordable housing and housing growth, and community discussions about the need for housing and where it should go and what it should look like. But we also want to acknowledge that every community is really unique in its character and what they need. And our program is really based on this premise that community support can make or break housing development at the local level. I'm sure you all have seen this when proposals are brought before your planning boards and your zoning boards and your community groups. And you need to have a strategy or coalition to build that local support, to know that when something is proposed, it's what the community actually wants and that you're ready to support it. So it's critical, and if you don't foster that support, the types of housing developments and the types of housing units that you want to build are not going to move forward. It's also critical to hear opposition and to acknowledge it, to mitigate any miscommunication or misinformation that's out there, and then really address concerns that people are raising in the community. And a coalition and a strategy around that can help you to do that. And you also need to highlight the need for housing. I love what Pam and Chris were able to bring and Susan to the table here tonight, because if you don't have the data to say, well, this is what we need, it's a lot of, well, my neighbor is looking for this, and well, I have a neighbor and they had a very different experience. So not just your one experience, but to look at that data and use it to inform your decisions. So we just know there's a lot of communities that don't have a strategy around this. So what we're doing is going into communities and helping them to build that coalition. And these are the types of people that we think need to be at the table in order to move affordable housing and housing production forward. So it's we've been kind of calling it the not your usual suspects. So it's the usual suspects, yes. The municipal staff and elected officials and housing advocates and developers, but also local businesses. That I love that example of, if I can't find someone to work at my business, it might be because they can't afford to live near my business. And what are my needs, or the low unemployment rate in my community? Maybe that's because people can't live here and they're moving where there are job opportunities. And how does that impact your business? Civic groups, veterans and people who are working with people with mental illness or people who have disabilities, houses of worship, they should be at the table. Environmental groups, there's a real connection between where housing is built and the environmental impact. And you want to make sure that that voice is heard in the coalition that you're building. Service providers, and Pam talked about homelessness prevention, but people who are doing work around food security and income security and child care providers, they know the needs of their community better than anyone else. And so making sure that they're at the table and their voices are heard from the beginning. And this is really based on a collaborative model that we use at the statewide level at SHAPA. And we found that building those coalitions to address challenges, it helps. Because all of the people who are active in the community, they build on the expertise that they all bring to the table. Everyone gains a comfort level of speaking about housing. So you might be a religious leader and housing is something that you do kind of on the periphery. You get the data, you get the knowledge, you get the glossary of terms, and you can feel confident speaking to these issues. So that's really what we're trying to do. But again, I think everyone here has raised this issue that it has to be a flexible model for each unique community, meeting each community where they are. So you've got a different housing stock, you've got different zoning, a different governance structure, town meeting versus a mayor. These are all things that you have to take into account. The economy in your local community, or the various partner organizations that are operating, the history of housing development. I think that's not, you don't want to brush that aside. So if there's been negatively perceived developments in your community before, you have to acknowledge that when you're thinking about going forward. Or if there's been really positive experiences, that might, people might say, well, let's do that again, but is that actually meeting the needs of the community that's going forward? So thinking about that history of development in your community is critical. And we also think that there's some lessons that people can learn. So as we're working with various communities, we're hoping to be able to connect them with each other so that if we're doing something in Acton, which is where we're working right now, and there's some lessons that folks in Arlington can learn from, I think there's a lot to be shared through this work. So talk to you a little bit about what the strategy for Arlington could look like. So really what we want to do is support efforts to build a culture that welcomes housing, including affordable housing. And that, again, looks different in every community. It bolsters your local efforts to expand housing opportunities. And we want to grow the number of people who are supporting housing production in local communities. And for us, success is kind of twofold. There's a coalition that's built, and there's people who are engaged. There's more people who are participating in the work of affordable housing and meeting the needs of affordable housing. And then there's also some production, or there's a positive outcome in a zoning bylaw that's passed that allows the community to say this is where we want the type of housing that we need. Or there's new funding sources that are identified. Maybe you pass CPA in your community, or you create a new housing trust, or you get inclusionary zoning passed. There's something that's happening. Or maybe there's a specific development that you as a community have identified as the place where you can meet some of your housing needs, and that gets built. So that's what we see as positive for our outcomes. So we've been working in Acton right now, and I'll give you some ideas of what this coalition building looks like. We've been pulling together all of those various partners. Your usual suspects like the Acton Community Housing Corporation and the Housing Authority and the various planners who work on this. But also we've got real estate agents who are coming, social service providers. We have several religious leaders who are coming to those meetings. And one of the things that we've seen that's really been effective there is, for example, I like to use this example of there's a pastor who I met with him, and I was saying, tell me about, someone had invited him to come to these coalition meetings. And I said, tell me about your experience with housing. He said, I'm not a housing person. I'm not an advocate. When someone says, come to this town, there are town meetings, or come to this town meeting and speak up in favor of housing, that's not me. But then as we started digging into what he does, he was telling me about one of their staff members who had to move to New Hampshire because she couldn't afford to live near the church that he operates. And so he had to help her find a better car so that she could make this long commute to Acton every day. And then he had they run a Wednesday night supper at their church for people who are, looking for affordable food, but also people who are looking for community. And he had a guy who comes, he doesn't need the food, he comes for the company. And he's living in a house that doesn't fit his needs. It's too big for him, but he can't downsize because he can't find anything in his community that fits his needs. He doesn't want to leave Acton. And he told me about a guy that was living in his car, and he helped him find an apartment in another community because they couldn't find one for him in Acton. So he actually was an affordable housing advocate. He just didn't understand how he was. And so having him in the room with other people who are doing this work, it's been really effective for him to say, these are the people I'm working with, and for the planners and the housing developers and the real estate agents to hear that story. So one of the things that we're seeing is that the housing advocates or the housing developers are able to take that and use that when they're having conversations with people and say, this is the need we see. So we have someone at the table who does, she does Habitat for Humanity development. And they have two units that they're developing there. And the wait list for that, or the applications for those 2 units was over 100 people. And so she's saying, oh my gosh, 100 people for 2 units. What she didn't realize until she started talking to others was those 100 people is kind of a drop in the bucket when you look at what the housing authority's wait list is. And so really being able to share all of those conversations, to bring in, we're starting to have conversations with folks who work with people with mental illness, I mentioned, and veterans. Those are often people who need housing assistance, but they're maybe not connected with what housing is being built. So again, just making sure that everyone at the table can advocate for each other and that they feel educated and empowered to speak about the need, not just from their perspective, but from the greater perspective of the community. So I think that's really what we're doing. That's one of the strategies that we hope communities can implement in order to move what they see as their real housing goals forward and actually see them implemented.
Well, I'm going to try and be relatively brief because we do want to make sure to leave time for you guys to speak. And so I'll try and go through the program that I run at the state relatively quickly. And I'll start with something that Susan alluded to. You can't just think about the same things. And I found this great Einstein quote. It's actually an Einstein quote because it's from the Google. But it seems right. You just can't look at this. You can't solve things by thinking in the same way that you create them. So I run a program called the Housing Choice Program, which is a program from the Baker-Polito administration. And one of the things that we're looking at is a change to state legislation, state land use laws. Chapter 40A, you've heard about 40B. Chapter 40A is called the Zoning Act, and it's what rules zoning in communities. One of the provisions of Chapter 40A, and if you've been to your town meeting, you know this, is that you need a 2/3 majority vote called a supermajority to pass zoning changes, any zoning change. So if you look at this map, it shows Massachusetts and then a bunch of other states. There's only 10 other states that have that kind of supermajority. We don't have a lot in common with these states, and we're certainly the only one in New England that has that 2/3 supermajority. You may have examples from your communities, but whether there's another 40R is called Smart Growth District. It's a provision where you identify a place that's served by transit and commercial activity, like Arlington Center. You do up zone or higher density, and you can actually get payments back from the state as a reward for doing that. So it's an incentive-based program. Those programs need a 2/3 majority. It's a zoning amendment to do it. They often fail, but there's a majority of people that supports them, but not a supermajority. Out in Acton, there's a pretty famous example of a 4-year planning process that fell 19 votes short to rezone a very tired commercial center at Kelly's Corner, which was the right place to put housing and the right place to redevelop and re-energize that commercial area. So these are the kind of history that we have for ourselves. So the governor has proposed legislation called an Act to Promote Housing Choices. It's pretty simple. It says if you want to do things if you want to change your zoning to promote housing production, you can have a simple majority at town meeting. Or if you're a city, it's just a simple majority of your city council. So that's House 4290. If you're really interested and you think that's a great idea, please talk to your legislatures. There's just about 6 weeks left in the legislative session. We'd love to see that get passed. But in addition to the legislative change, we've created this program called the Housing Choice, which is a destination base. The bigger Pluto administration wants to work with communities. They are not going to come down and say you have to do certain things. They want to offer incentives and rewards and work as partners with communities. So have anybody heard about green communities? Complete Streets, so you guys have Complete Streets, great. Those are both destination-based programs. You have criteria set out there. If you meet those criteria, then you get some good things. Housing choices like that. If you've been producing a certain amount of housing over the last 5 years, there's a 5% increase for 500 units, or you produce 3% increase in 300 units and have some best practices, you can be a housing choice community. And so that was opened up this year. The best practices are a whole range. Arlington did not make it this year, but the best practices are the things that we would suggest for communities as kind of a roadmap. That these are zoning related or funding related things that your community can and should do to promote housing, and it's the way that you're going to get to produce. If you do these things, you're going to produce more housing units. So it ranges from funding housing, which sounds like you are doing with your CPA, to having inclusionary zoning, to having good accessory dwelling unit bylaws, to allowing mixed use, allowing higher densities, having multifamily by right, etc. So these is a map of the 67. Actually, there were 67 and we announced them. We are actually now up to 69. We have 2 more. Plainville and Berlin have qualified. They had some bad zoning that they overturned in their springtime meetings, and so they qualified. So what do I have for these communities to offer as a reward for doing this housing production? I have money. We've heard that you guys do need money. We heard from your selectmen. I have a capital grants program to reward communities that have been doing this. It can be used for a whole range of different things, but basically is there to reward communities and act as an incentive to communities to come do some housing production so that you can qualify. In addition to the capital grants that I have, you also, as a community for housing choice, get advantages in other state capital programs. MassWorks is one of the main funding sources for public infrastructure. You get some bonus points in that. And there's a whole list of 9 different programs that you can get some bonus points in. On the less sexy side, but really important from the state side, you've heard people talk about silos. I'm also running, and actually Dana and I co-chair a group to bring housing agencies together and get out of our silos, and we're creating a coordinated database of all the technical assistance and grants that are given across the state. You'd think that the state would kind of know exactly what agency's doing what and who's done what where. That's not true. I actually came from local government. I worked for a town for 7 years, and I thought the state had it all together, and I thought that I actually knew about most of those programs. Neither one of those were that true. I didn't know about as many programs as there were, and also there are agencies sometimes that go from town to town or city to city, and they don't know that somebody else has actually just given another grant, or there's been, a CDG grant that just went in for something, and so this is a way of working with that. So it's a really exciting tool. My grant program will just open up in the summer and will be announced in the fall. That's a very quick run through for Housing Choice, and we're looking forward to hearing from you guys.
Great. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. Once again, let's just take a round of applause. questions of any one of the panelists. We actually only have this mic, so if you'd like to come up, I will, yeah.
You can yell.
Yeah, or yell.
I can't speak that loudly. I'm not sure that I can speak that loudly. My name is Susan Mortimer, and I've been a resident here about 10 years, and was when I was younger. Spent the preceding 30 years of my life in Somerville. And I wanted to not ask the question because I wanted to offer comment, something a little bit different, because I feel that only being able to ask a question sort of frames the dialogue, and it's difficult. So I would like to thank the person who mentioned people in the presentation. I only heard the word people once. I heard different names, and that's what I came here for tonight, was to hear more about that. I heard many statistics, and I've heard those before. I ran a very successful homelessness prevention program at the old Somerville Mental Health, people that had a lot of challenges. I wanted to say what we didn't hear from people tonight that are tenants, and as a tenant in Somerville, I would really like to be included and have us included more in forums, and there's a reason why I would like to be included. I think, and home owners as well. I'll try to make this briefer. He's very busy, but I waited a while. There are a lot of challenges being a tenant in Arlington as well as other places with the rents going up. I do feel, however, though, that people who rent in this town are not always seen as being as valuable as homeowners. And I wanted to say, I'm very happy to see that there's at least 2 board members at HCA here, and I would love to be able to speak with you. We did ask to be able to contact you, and the director decided to not disclosing your emails to us or to give us meeting and time dates, and I'd love to do that. I think the voices of tenants and renters need to be heard. There's lots of things that are happening, and I think maybe town might used to go to a different place. Even nationally, we're adding more to policing and prisons. We're doing that here in Arlington as well, giving more and more money and tasks to the police and doing different. And there are other ways to probably think about how some of the shortages in housing is not an accident or lack of planning. It's based on systemic inequality structures like racism, redlining, from the old GI Bill that I think a lot of people use, older people use to get here. So I would love to have that opportunity for the tenants of HCA to meet with the board. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So hopefully, maybe a question, we'd really like to be able to have our panelists be able to answer some questions. There's somebody in the back with his hand up.
Bob Radosha, this is fast. You spent, I think it was Susan, spent $600 a month rent in Somerville. That wasn't recent, is it?
I'm sorry?
How long ago was that?
Oh, that like is my age away. I don't know how I feel. No, I'm kidding.
The basic question
So that was like 1986.
okay, what would that rent be today? Or do we know what the average 2-bedroom rent is in Arlington?
Say close to $3,000.
3? How many?
3,000.
In Somerville.
So there's a 2-bedroom in.
Yeah, so the building I lived in is actually was converted to condos, right? So to the previous speaker's point, it further limits the diversity of incomes when, that happens as well, because rentals are usually more affordable. But I would say it's probably like anywhere from $2,800 to $3,000.
Does the same thing apply in Arlington for a 2-bedroom?
About 25.
Oh, yes.
We know that?
About 2,500.
2,500? Okay.
2,400 would be a market.
That would be market, okay, fine. The other one is Airbnb. Do we know if we're involved in any of that right now? Because that seems to be one of the things that's taking housing out of play.
There's lots of it in Arlington.
There are units that are listed on Airbnb that are in Arlington.
There are.
Yes.
Are they owner occupied?
I don't know the status of each particular property, but they are listed on Airbnb.
Because that, there's a lot been said about it recently. The Mayor Walsh is on a rampage about it because it's taking housing out of play.
Yeah, I think the city council's vote last night or the night before was pretty good. I thought that was a good, it's hard to get a balance, I thought that was a good balance.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. First guest. It's actually behind you, I'm sorry. I don't know her name. Yes, please.
Laura Kiesel, and I wanted to ask a question. Well, first, there just seems to be a lot of emphasis on building new housing. And I'm a housing reporter. I report a lot on housing, and I know I read like Matthew Desmond's Evicted. He even said this isn't something we're going to be able to build our way out of necessarily. I live in affordable housing, and I can't really afford it. Plus, there's that middle ground between affordable and the higher incomes who can't fit in that gray area. But one question I do have is I know, for Section 8, the payment standards do not match up with market rates, and that's not necessarily unique to Arlington, but say you get a Section 8 voucher, because Matthew Desmond of Evicted said we should have more vouchers rather than just looking at building, which we can't necessarily do. And the payment standard here in Arlington is $1,500 for a one bedroom. You can't find an apartment really for $1,500 very easily, a one bedroom. And I know that there was a lawsuit in 2010 by the Inclusive Communities Project in Dallas to start bringing a lot of these payment standards more in line with market rates. It was like called the small area market rate formula or the zip code formula. And they were spearheading it for like 24 municipalities. And I was told when I did my article on it that communities and municipalities could opt into this if they're eligible, which I can't always find out if they are. So why isn't the Arlington Housing Authority opting in, or are they not eligible, and why are they not eligible?
I can't speak to the Arlington, I don't know, I could look into it.
Because that seems like that would help, because when I even called, I'm on the voucher list, and I could luckily afford it because I live in affordable housing, but if I was not, I could not afford to live in Arlington with a voucher. And AHA even told me that they had to turn away like 98% of the vouchers they gave back. Like people had to surrender their vouchers because they could not find housing in here. So it just seems that opting into that formula could make a huge difference.
I don't think it's that easy, actually. So I'm also the commissioner on the Cambridge Housing Authority, and we're a moving to work agency. It's a little more complicated than it's not just opting in. And I think what's happening on the federal level is that the Section 8 program is actually, continuously at risk. But I would love to talk to you offline about it. I think it would be more
this is
helpful.
what I was told even just 2 days ago by
Right.
Section 8, the regional directors about opting in. So
Yeah.
that's what they called it.
Yeah, I
know
think
it's probably a whole process.
It is, but I'm happy to talk to you offline. Yeah.
So I can't speak to the opting into the fair market rent or the area rent, but what I will say is that the issue of people getting a voucher, which is a really long wait list to get a voucher, and then having a really hard time finding a unit. So that is about the voucher's value, but it's also about the units that are out there. And again, in communities that I've worked in and met with, people they get a voucher and they're leaving their community. They think, oh, this is great, I got a voucher, I'm ready, I can go get my apartment, and they can't find anything for that rent in their community. And they're not just going to the town over that has adopted a different payment standard, they're leaving the community altogether. Or they're giving that voucher up, which is very sad. So that's, there is a connection to the production of housing with that voucher. I think your point is well taken, but there's also hand in hand with the new housing to meet that demand.
I have a question about the chart that showed the dramatic decline in production in housing in Massachusetts. I wonder if and I think it was your chart, whether you could put that in context of either our region or nationally.
Way back in the beginning.
And if you don't have the information, that's fine too. I just am curious how Massachusetts, which has declined, I think it was 30,000 units a year.
We got
Yeah.
Luckily, Susan has on the same slides. So again, your question was, this is statewide data, and your question was?
How in the context of our region, New England, or nationally? In other words, Massachusetts.
Yeah. So I can tell you.
That was the one.
Yeah, no, I think they're looking for one. I can just tell you that that it does not a line, there is not a similarity, except for everybody dips in the 90s because of that last recession, right? So there is kind of this economic dip. But there are other areas of the country that were growing and producing at much higher levels despite that economic dip.
Right, because I see it, and I think also about the jobs policy, sort of the one policy for the whole nation in terms of jobs. And someone was talking about in Massachusetts or in Everett with this casino, we may not even be able to find people to work there. But I know in Cleveland or St. Louis or other parts of the country, it's very different. And so it's really just a really interesting problem to think about both housing policy and jobs policy in a local fashion versus a regional or national.
And we do that, we look at that all the time. So that was that other migration chart, right? But what you'll find is that there's this kind of interesting dynamic where businesses go where people are, and so, which is kind of different, right, than what's happened in the past. So, yeah, no, that's a great point.
And I would just, that's what I was like, yeah.
The building permit.
This is what I was going to try and point you to if you downloaded the slideshow from the town's website, this is the building permits, and this is number of permits by metro area across the country. And I think this really informs that and where are people going. And again, it doesn't mean that we have to be like Texas, because Texas has some things that we may not agree with, inherently. But there are other places other than Texas here, and it just kind of goes to, and I think as Susan very compellingly talked about, is this exclusive zoning that's really come into towns throughout Massachusetts.
Actually, you had your hand up before, and then you put it down, so I'm going to ask you and then Patricia. Okay. Megan.
My name is Megan Collinsby, and I live here in town. I'm a teacher. My question to all of you is, how can the housing authority here in Arlington change their infrastructure from the inside out regarding Section 8 vouchers and the calculated number of people and or investing in people, families, your stats of over 1,000 families on a list is staggering. It's unacceptable. People don't have the time allotted in terms of their lives and present day, the jobs. It's an affliction on their lives being at stake, and homelessness, which is right outside where I work at school, which is right here in Arlington. I teach 4- and 5-year-olds. I hope they're running the country, and or the policies, and or the state and the legislation. Just the whole infrastructure is really not helping.
So let me see if we can answer that question. I don't know if any of us have an answer to that question.
Well, I would say, I'm not quite sure I understand how you're using the term infrastructure. What I would say is that the state is constantly looking at ways to be innovative around the use of state land, including surplus public housing land to support. That's not what you mean.
I was asking about the housing authority itself. There's more exploitation, and I guess I would break it down to the fact that these properties here in town, there are coding and they are not being regulated. So there are violations via the Board of Health, but it's a known fact and happening at a state level.
We've heard that that is the case. I think there are people that are trying to look into that, but I don't know that the town can speak to that. Sure.
We have
somebody from the audience who will answer.
Hi, I'm Mary Ann Morrison, I'm a board member, and I used to be the director in state rental assistance programs at DHCD, but that was like almost 7 years ago. I can tell you, with regards to the Housing Authority's Section 8 program, because it's federally funded, I'm going to give you a bureaucratic answer, but it's a start. There are people at the regional HUD office in Boston who oversee them, and it means hammering away to find the right person. But they have an obligation to make sure that the Housing Authority is approving only decent, safe, and sanitary units. They have an obligation to make sure they comply with all sorts of reasonable, albeit sometimes bureaucratic rules. So that's a start. And to the woman who talked about opting in for higher FMRs, you might want to talk to the director of federal and state rental assistance at DHCD. Brendan is his first name, I don't remember his last name. He and our staff will be able to give you clarity on what that's all about, okay?
Thank you. I can't go that way.
Patricia Worden. I have two questions. One is, as regards the rewards that you mentioned with respect to the community choice program, it would also be relevant for 40 hours and whatnot. Are those rewards subject to appropriation, or have they a more stable source on which the communities could depend? And the second question is something that has been contributing very much to the lack of affordable housing to the lower middle income range is the terror epidemic. And I'd like to ask your opinion as to how reforms can be made to reduce the terror epidemic. We have found that citizen efforts to legislative change have met with resistance from the politicians in town and actually housing advocates. I think that it's really becoming a tragedy for many communities that have been ruined by the teardowns. And do you have any suggestions for reform in that regard? That's my second question.
One of them is for Chris, and then everybody else.
What excellent questions. So the housing choice budget is partially appropriated by the legislature and partially in the capital plan. Unfortunately, the legislature did not include about a third of my capital budget in its budget that was recently adopted by the House and the Senate. There is a conference committee that is discussing that right now, but the majority, the 2/3 of it, is in the governor's capital plan. And so this is one of the governor's top 3 priorities, and so I'm sure that that capital funding will continue. We'd like to have more because we had 69 communities. We thought we'd have about 40, so we have more communities than we thought, possibly a little bit less money. So I do think that the governor will make sure that the capital funds are there, but we had hoped to have additional help from the legislature. So that's a good question and answer. Who wants to take the tear down question? I'll take a stab at it. It is very difficult in the structure of Massachusetts general laws to limit property rights to do what you want to do with your property as long as it meets the zoning. And unfortunately, a demolition and then a replacement with a single family house, it might be bigger, but if it still meets all the setbacks, is allowed by right. I think that in order to fight that, I would suggest looking at what is the zoning of other areas of town. One of the things that happens in kind of single family neighborhoods that might have 8,000 square foot lots. They may be, have been downzoned over time so that you may have been able to build in your neighborhood a little bit more densely, and that has been kind of removed. That's part of the changes in the zoning, and we talked about restrictive zoning in the 80s, 90s, I'm sorry, in the 90s, 10s and teens. That's come into play, and so there is this kind of missing middle, and so if you can intensify the zoning, not by zoning it for multifamily necessarily, but by looking at allowing duplexes and looking at allowing townhouses or allowing for smaller lot development, that changes the economic scale for a tear down and a replacement with a big house. That's one approach. It doesn't necessarily reform, I think, what you're talking about, but it is one approach that you can examine as you look, as you're doing your housing plan implementation.
Thank you. In the back.
Yes, hi, Jonathan Iver. I apologize I was a little late, but one question I wanted to ask you is many times in groups, maybe like tonight or otherwise, you know, a lot of people are very liberal thinking, very open, but when it actually comes to voting or having it in their backyard or having it in Acton, or all of a sudden then when the economics meet the social ideals, how do you guys deal with that? Or how do you, because you could have a great idea, be rolling forward, and all of a sudden, you know, 12 people from the neighborhood show up, and it's, you know, something that could help 300 people now is negated by 12 people. So how do you work with those type of political but also social dynamics to help with housing?
So yeah, I think that's the question I was saying. Local support can make or break something, and you won't know until the night of a vote the way it's going to go. That's how votes go. So I think the 2/3 change could be something, because in a lot of these things, it's not that it lost the majority of votes; it's that it lost the 2/3. So that's one component. So that could change the numbers game, I guess. But what we're thinking could help is really bringing people in before that night, so you're not surprised, right? And talking to people, talk to your neighbors, and hopefully helping people to be informed so that they can have an informed conversation with a neighbor. And often it's people don't come out to support something because they don't even know that it's important, or they don't even know the details about it. So something that you could do is look at, for example, your town meeting warrant and take the pieces that you think are really important and put a little blurb together that you could share with people and say, this is why it's important, and this is the need that this proposal is addressing. And start having those conversations early and making people understand why what you're proposing is something that they would also support. And then again, like I said, addressing opposition, mitigating real concerns before it gets to the point of a vote, so that you hopefully aren't surprised at that point.
And I would also add to that, field trips. Going to places that have done what you're proposing and the sky did not fall down. And we've seen that happen a number of times. And then what's great is when you do something and it fits in the community and is denser, but people are happy, and then, you know, someone comes up to you who's opposed to it before and says, it's so much better because I was involved, right? Because it probably is better. So I think field trips are important.
Thank you, good idea.
Jonathan, I just want to add one more piece. We went into a lot of negative feedback from the local community of some of our planned buildings, and we actually had a number of our tenants who came and supported, stood up and said, but for this housing 10 years ago, you know, I would not be here, my daughter would not be in high school, very heart-rending kind of reporting, and oftentimes it would just change the tenor of the meeting completely. So that's another way to go about it.
Thank you.
And I would just add on to that, if tenants are not willing to stand up, you can actually just document, you know, quotes from tenants, and then somebody else can read them and say, I'm just reading from somebody else who just didn't want to stand up at town meeting, or didn't want to, couldn't, whatever it is. So.
Thank you.
Well, Steve did too.
Okay, sure. So, really quick questions. One is, when it comes to the number of people who are on waiting list, if you can be on a waiting list in more than one town, do you have any sense of how much double counting there is? Two, I know the governor has done like an initiative, an executive order to do like this, the future transportation. Has he done something similar with respect to housing? And three, I know that MAPC has started, working on Metro Future, and I'm wondering how towns can maybe feed into that process in order to get a big global sense of how housing fits into everything.
Like 3 questions there.
I don't know.
On the wait list.
I'm going to take the wait.
I'm going to take this, your second question, which I'm sorry.
The initiative,
Right. So it's different. Yes, in fact, what he did, the reason that I'm here is because he did that a year ago and brought in very smart people like Sue Connolly and other people from all sorts of different agencies, and not only housing agencies, there were Mass DOT, Department of Revenue, Energy and Environmental Affairs, got those people together and said, what should we do about housing? And the Housing Choice Initiative that I described is what they came up with. So he's already done that.
Great.
I can answer some of your question on the wait list. If you're talking about the Housing Authority, they have a centralized wait list, and what each town does, or each local housing authority is, they go into that wait list and pull people from the local area into their wait list. So their wait list is pretty much Arlington residents. Not that all of their tenants necessarily were Arlington residents prior to becoming tenants. On our wait list, we could certainly be sharing some of the people on the Arlington housing wait list. We have no way of knowing that. They're a little difficult to deal with.
Great.
Metro Future.
I do want to say one of my slides, I didn't make the point, but I think your point is perfect about regional conversations and cooperation, because we don't all live, work, and play just in our community, right? And so I think that's so important. I think MAPC and Metro Futures, I think that's all work in the right direction. The challenge is, except for the Cape Cod Commission, none of the regional planning agencies in the state of Massachusetts have any regulatory authority. And so when you look at what happens on the Cape, they actually do behave like a region. They do behave differently because they're set up differently. So it's hard. Jenny and I have talked about this offline. I think that especially communities that are impacted by Somerville and Cambridge and what's happening there, that Somerville and Cambridge should be part of a conversation with its neighbors, because I think it is a more regional approach.
I am on the Metropolitan Area Planning Council Executive Committee. And Metro Future, which is the regional plan currently, is going through an update and may not necessarily be Metro Future anymore. It will have a new name. And there will actually be regional conversations that will be launching in the fall. So I don't have an update on that, but when we do, we'll be sure to share that with this community. Steve.
I have one data point to share about housing prices and one question for Susan. I live in a house that was built in 1947, and when this house sold, the original sale price was $4,995. Now, if you adjust that for inflation, in today's dollars, it's about $53,000. Current assessed value is $419,000. So, yes, it's a disaster, and we have a real affordability problem. But going back, my question, earlier you mentioned something about, sometimes we like to grumble about, what are those developers doing? But you sort of implied that there were reasons for developers doing what they do, like restrictive zoning and I think perhaps other things. I was wondering if you
talking about 40B? Is that what I was doing? Yes. I was talking about 40B. So I think my point I was trying to make, and I love your data, and I would love to use your house as an example in my slideshow, Can I get a picture? Will you send me and send me those data points? Because I just think that's awesome. So what I was trying to say about 40B, and maybe I wasn't articulate, is that we have it because of the ways that communities have behaved in the past. So communities have, discriminated against different housing types because they want to keep folks out who don't look like them or have the same income as them. And yet those communities benefit from investment on the state level, from the work that the diversity of people, provide. And so this kind of demonizing 40B, I understand it, but we've created that situation. That's what I was trying to say. That's, yeah.
We've created our own hell.
Quick fact is 20 Westminster is a 40B development.
Yes, yeah.
Technically.
And I just, one quick example, we worked with the Sudbury Housing Authority. They had six obsolete single-family homes, and they wanted to demolish them and put up duplexes, so they would have then 12 affordable homes. They had to get 6 40B permits. That would happen here. Because you don't have the zoning to do it. So we've created that crazy.
And it took us over a year to get through the 40B process. There was no opposition to it, but it just takes that long.
Which is, time is money.
And there was a question over here previously, I don't know, maybe not anymore. Then just, yes, sir.
My name is Kevin. I live in the Apple Square apartments. I was just wondering what you're doing about, I know there's been some like safety issues, like the bricks falling and so like activity with our dog.
Sounds like safety issues and maybe,
that sounds like good.
Yeah. He's talking about one of our buildings. We had slate that was falling off our historic roofs. And so we had to tape off certain areas so that tenants didn't get hit by falling slate. And it took us a number of months to get the commission to approve us going in and doing the work. That's the Commission on Historic Structures. We had to get permission to go do the work. We had to show them exactly what we were going to do. We had to show them the bids. And then it took them probably about 2 months to actually get it work done. So that's what Kevin's referring to, unfortunately.
in the back.
Just one quick one. It's a follow-up to the previous question or comment regarding the original price of the house, price today, and the inflation. I think you should also factor in what the taxes were then and what they are now, and how it relates to inflation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, kind of again, when I talk about context in my presentation, we need to talk about healthcare, retirement, pension obligations for communities, all of these costs that start to tip local budgets, and then the cap on the 2.5%. I mean, absolutely, you can't, I always say the work that we do is like a Rubik's Cube. You know what I mean? You start moving stuff around and you're trying to line it all up. But yeah, no, I think it's a great point.